John McClane is a New York Police Department detective traveling to Los Angeles for a Christmas party at his estranged wife Holly's company. He's picked up from the airport by a limo driver, Argyle. They reach the party's location at the Nakatomi Corporation building, and Argyle agrees to wait for John in the parking garage. John's marriage is in shambles as he failed to support her when she got promoted. John meets with Holly and learns that today's party is mainly due to her closing a huge deal. He asks for a place to wash up but ends up arguing with Holly. Holly excuses herself to make a speech. In the building's lobby, two men execute the security guard and open the garage for other armed men. Argyle is listening to music and doesn't hear anything. The men seize the party, taking the people hostage apart from John, who manages to slip away. The leader, Hans, calls the man in charge, Takagi, demanding he give him the code to break into the company's vault. Hans intends to steal $640 million in untraceable bearer bonds. However, Takagi maintains he doesn't have the access code, causing Hans to execute him. Hans calls in his technology expert Theo. Theo says that the vault has 7 locks in place, and while he can get to the first 6 codes, it will take a miracle to get to the 7th. Hans tells Theo to get working, and he will get his miracle. John realizes the communication lines have been cut off, and only the employees of Nakatomi are in the building. He triggers the fire alarm and watches the emergency vehicles approach the building. Sadly, Hans' men turn off the alarm, causing the cars to turn back. John is ambushed by one of the men, and after struggling for a while, he kills him, sending the body down the elevator shaft. The man's brother, Carl, learns of the murder and swears personal vengeance on John. John takes anything he can use from the man, including a radio. He goes to the roof of the plaza and uses the radio to broadcast an emergency message. The LAPD's call center picks up the message, but John's message is also heard by Hans, who dispatches Carl and 2 others to eliminate John. The thugs ambush John and start shooting at him, but luckily he hides from the thugs by crawling into a vent. A few miles out, Sergeant Al Powell is getting snacks at a convenience store when he gets a call to investigate the Nakatomi Plaza. He pulls up and finds the security guard, who explains that the system has been acting up and sending emergency messages all day. John sees the car and tries to get Powell's attention, but is spotted by Hans' men. 2 of them approach him, but John kills one on the spot. The other pins him under the table, but John also eliminates him. John takes anything he can use from the thugs, including a bag full of C4s and ammunition. John calls Hans via the radio and explains he's executed 2 of his men. Hans learns that John has stolen the bag with the detonators and demands that the thugs find and eliminate John. Downstairs, Powell decides to walk around the building. He's about to be ambushed by a terrorist when he decides to turn back. Powell radios in a no disturbance report to the police station. John sees the police car leaving and grabs the dead terrorist's body and drops it on the car just as the other terrorists open fire on the vehicle. Powell radios in for help, but the terrorist's relentless shooting causes him to crash the car. Powell emerges from the crashed car just as multiple police cars arrive. He reaches out to John via the radio. John explains that the terrorists are professionals due to the arsenal of weapons in their possession. He also explains that almost 30 hostages are trapped in the building. A reporter, Thornburg, pulls up and starts reporting the incident. This finally gets Argyle's attention as he realizes he's trapped in the garage. LAPD Police Chief Dwayne T. Robinson arrives on the scene. He's skeptical of Powell's report since no one is called with a list of demands. Theo sees this and he informs the others. They shoot the lights, blinding and eliminating the SWAT team. Robinson then sends in a military rover, but the thugs use a rocket launcher to hit the rover. Hans orders his men to shoot the rover again and execute the officers trapped inside. John retrieves the C4s and throws them down the elevator shaft, creating a massive explosion that takes out 2 terrorists and devastates an entire floor. News of the terrorist activities takes the lead, with the police suspecting that Hans Gruber, a member of the radical movement in Germany, is behind the attacks. Meanwhile, Harry Ellis, Holly's co-worker, decides to negotiate a deal with Hans. He reveals John's real identity and that he works for the New York Police Department. Hans calls John, demanding he give up the detonator's location or Ellis dies. John knows that no matter what he does, Hans will execute Ellis, so he refuses to surrender. True to his thoughts, a gunshot echoes on the radio. Hans yells at John to return the detonators or else he'll eliminate another person. He calls the police and gives the names of the insurgents he wants to be released. He also orders a plane to transport his team and the hostages to the airport. John hears the requests but doesn't believe them. Hans orders Carl and a few others to go after John while he checks the bombs. He suddenly comes across John. Hans disguises himself as a hostage, saying he's escaped and is looking for a way to send a signal to the police through the roof. John warns him that the roof isn't safe. John then gives him a weapon to defend himself. John turns around to leave, but Hans raises the weapon at John's head, demanding he surrender. Hans fires the weapon, but it's unloaded, meaning John has already picked up who Hans is. Before John can attack Hans, the other terrorists arrive and a firefight starts. Hans orders Carl to shoot the glass as he remembers that John is barefooted. Even though he's at great risk, John manages to escape with deep cuts on his feet. Hans finds his detonators and goes back upstairs. The dire situation causes the FBI to get to the scene and take charge. They are arrogant and believe they will get Hans and his men. At the same time, Theo unlocks the 6th lock. He informs Hans of this achievement and asks for the miracle Hans had promised. The FBI orders that the power to the building be cut out. Hans sees this and tells Theo that this is the miracle they've been waiting for. Cutting the power turns off the 7th lock's electromagnetic field and opens the vault. Hans then calls the FBI, who informs him that his comrades are being released and a helicopter will be ready at the roof in 5 minutes. Hans tells his men that they will blow up the roof when the helicopter arrives. The police will take a month to comb through the rubble, and it will be too late by the time they understand what went wrong. Meanwhile, John speaks to Powell, wondering why he has desk duty. Powell shares that he accidentally killed a kid and can never fire his weapon again for fear of repetition. At this time, only 5 of the 12 terrorists remain, courtesy of John. John calls Powell, asking him to deliver a message to Holly if he doesn't make it. He apologizes for being an unsupportive husband and confesses he'll do anything to fix his marriage. Meanwhile, Thornburg learns of John's family. He broadcasts this on live TV, causing Hans to kidnap Molly as his insurance policy. John remembers seeing Hans by the electrical cords. John follows them and finds several C4s near the roof, deducing Hans's plan. He calls Powell, but before he can warn him, Carl apprehends him. Luckily, John defeats Carl but sustains a gunshot wound. He runs to the roof to get Holly, but he doesn't find her. John tells the people to exit the roof, but the hostages see the helicopters and wave frantically, thinking they're being rescued. John fires at the crowd, but the FBI agents in the helicopter assume he's a terrorist and start shooting at him. This prompts the hostages to run back into the building while John propels himself off using a fire hose just as Hans detonates the bombs. The resulting explosion takes down the helicopters and damages the building, causing it to start collapsing. John starts looking for Holly while Hans and his men grab the bonds in a hurry to escape. Argyle sees Theo in the parking garage retrieving the getaway truck. He hits the truck with his limo and then knocks him unconscious. John catches up with Hans and kills one of the men, leaving Hans and another man. Hans holds Holly hostage, so John surrenders his weapon but removes the one he has concealed on his back and shoots at the two. Hans falls through the window but latches onto Holly's hand, intending to take her down. John intervenes and releases Hans' hand from Holly, watching Hans die. The hostages are rescued and John meets Powell. Suddenly, Carl appears with a machine gun. Everyone takes cover save for Powell, who removes his weapon and executes Carl, ending his fear of holding a weapon. Thornburg approaches Holly for an interview, but she punches him. The film ends as Holly and John drive off in Argyle's dented limo. 2 years after the Nakatomi incident, John McClane is a lieutenant in the LAPD. On Christmas Eve, he's at the Dulles International Airport waiting to pick up Holly. He calls Holly and learns that her plane will land in 30 minutes. John decides to wait for her in the airport's lounge. At the same time, a plane carrying corrupt foreign military leader General Esperanza is en route. Several men led by Colonel Stewart enter the airport and depart on various missions. John sees 2 of these men acting suspiciously. He tries talking to the airport police officers but comes across the cop who had impounded his car earlier, so he stays quiet. John follows one of the men into a restricted baggage sorting area. He asks a worker to call the police while he ventures inside. He calls out to the men and a firefight starts. John manages to eliminate one of the men, but the other runs away. On the plane, Holly interacts with a passenger who carries a taser for self-defense. She also sees unpopular news journalist Thornburg being hassled by the flight attendants. Thornburg wants to be transferred to another cabin as he's filed a restraining order against Holly after she punched him and humiliated him on live TV in the Nakatomi case. John exits the baggage area and finds the press waiting to hear about the gunfight. John is angry as he wonders why the police aren't sealing off the site, which is a crime scene. He's taken to the airport police chief Lorenzo. Lorenzo has heard of John due to the Nakatomi case, however he refuses to shut down a significant part of the airport during Christmas week and claims that John should leave the airport if he has a problem. John catches up with the coroners and takes the dead guy's fingerprints. He faxes them to Al Powell, hoping to get a match. Powell reveals that the prints belong to an American soldier reported dead 2 years ago in a helicopter accident. John seeks out the air traffic control director, Ed Trudeau, and warns him of impending danger. Suddenly, the runway lighting powers off and the airplanes about to land start calling in, wondering what's happening. A call comes through and Stewart explains he's seized control of the airport's communication and lighting system. He gives Trudeau 2 minutes to communicate with the coming airplanes, rerouting those that can while advising the others to hold in the air. Stewart informs Trudeau to let Esperanza's plane touch down at the runway of his designation and stay unbothered. He also wants a cargo plane at his disposal. Stewart warns Trudeau that any attempts to disobey his commands will be met with severe consequences. John gets into an argument with Carmine, blaming him for ignoring everything he's told him. Carmine calls police officers to escort John out of the control tower alongside news reporter Samantha Coleman. On the way down, John stops the elevator, intending to leave out of the escape hatch. Coleman asks John for a comment, but he's rude. She reveals that he had gotten the same comment from disgraced Colonel Stewart, making John remember him from earlier in the day. Chief Airport Engineer Barnes decides to use an unfinished antenna array to communicate with the planes. Eager to help, Carmine sends in a SWAT team to accompany Barnes. Meanwhile, John meets Marvin, the airport janitor, and asks for directions to the unfinished tower where Barnes is headed. Unfortunately, Barnes and the SWAT team are ambushed by Stewart's men. Barnes is about to be killed when John arrives and saves him. A firefight ensues, during which John kills most of Stewart's men. Just when Barnes wants to get to the antenna, it explodes. John fears that Stewart might retaliate when he learns of his men's execution. He gets a radio from one of the dead guys, but it has a code that scrambles the channel, making it hard to hear what Stewart and his people are discussing. The phone rings in the control tower, and Stewart scolds Trudeau for ignoring his warning and attempting to restore the airport system. John intervenes, saying that 5 officers are dead, so it should be even. However, Stewart contacts a plane from London that's low on fuel and clears it for landing, altering the altimeter to 200 feet. Everyone is horrified as they realize the plane will crash. John runs to the runway hoping to save the 230 passengers on board. He waves 2 torches at the plane, but it crashes and explodes. Stewart explains that more such incidences will occur if Trudeau and his people don't adhere to his rules. Trudeau informs John that Holly's plane will run out of fuel in 90 minutes. The group welcomes the AUS Special Forces team led by Major Grant. He had trained Stewart, and when John questions his intentions, Grant reveals he's there to arrest Stewart. Grant holds a meeting but excludes John as he's a civilian. 13 airplanes are hovering in the airfield, and Thornburg suspects something's wrong. He asks his technician to tap into the airplane's communication system. Esperanza's plane approaches the airport and Stewart gets his team prepared. At the same time, John finds Marvin with a radio which is still active. This helps him learn of Esperanza's arrival. He has executed his escorts and the pilots and is demanding to land immediately. Stewart clears a runway for him and John uses the tunnels to reach it first. He ambushes Esperanza, but Stewart and his men arrive and start firing at John. John shoots Esperanza on the shoulder and locks himself in the cabin. Stewart throws grenades into the plane hoping to eliminate John, but he ejects on the pilot seat at the last minute. Grant is furious at John for interfering and endangering many people's lives, seeing that Stewart might decide to retaliate. However, John remains steadfast in his actions as Barnes has found a way to contact the airplanes and warn them of the situation. Barnes reveals that Stewart and his people must be near the airport. The two find 12 locations with close proximity to the control tower. Eventually, they find Stewart's team regrouping in a church. John tackles one of Stewart's men while Barnes calls for backup. Grant and his men arm themselves with blue-taped magazines, similar to the ones Stewart's team uses. The team approaches the house and triggers an alarm. Stewart and his men exchange gunfire with the team before escaping on snowmobiles. John kills one of the men and steals his snowmobile to chase after Stewart. He comes head-to-head with one of the men and shoots him. However, Stewart's team bombards his snowmobile with bullets, causing it to explode. John jumps off at the last minute and retrieves his weapon, wondering why the bullets didn't harm the assailant. He is horrified to discover that the weapon is filled with blanks, showing that Grant is working with Stewart. Meanwhile, Thornburg calls his production team and broadcasts everything happening, causing panic at the airport. John employs Marvin's help to get to Carmine's office. He tries explaining what's happening, but Carmine wants to arrest him. John shoots at Carmine, revealing the bullets were blanks. He orders all the police officers to arm themselves and get to the hangar where Stuart's plane awaits. Holly hears the news broadcast and steals her neighbor's stun gun. She stuns Thornburg, ending the live transition. The chaos in the airport prevents the police from driving to the hangar. John spots Coleman and calls her for help. Grant's team get to the hangar and reunites with Stuart. He congratulates Esperanza for his escape, but the leader wants to wait until they have left the country. They all get onto the plane and celebrate success in their mission. John learns that Holly's plane will attempt a crash landing as it's about to run out of fuel. He gets on Coleman's crew's helicopter and asks the pilot to drop him on top. He uses his coat to jam the aileron, and Esperanza reports that the plane cannot take off. Grant volunteers to go after John and ensure he executes him properly this time. Grant and John have a bloody fight, which ends with John pushing Grant into the engine. Stuart goes after John next, but John opens the fuel tank before engaging in combat with Stuart. Stuart beats up John and kicks him off the plane, not realizing that John has opened the fuel tank, spilling fuel all over. He removes the coat, clearing the airplane for flight. As the plane starts ascending, John uses his lighter to ignite a fire on the fuel trail. The fire spreads quickly and catches up with the plane, making it explode and killing everyone on board. The burning fuel trail helps the pilots land Holly's plane successfully. John runs toward the plane and reunites with Holly while Trudeau and his people celebrate their victory. The film ends as Holly and John are wheeled off in Marvin's car.